Alright, good morning, everybody. I just posted my rank 1 game. I'm going to do a little bit of recording right now as I do have some time to spare. So I'm going to go ahead and record the Warlock breakdown. I didn't get a chance to announce that was my next one. My async tournament's not going so great. I just lost 2 matches in a row, which is kind of a bummer, but it is what it is, I guess. Oops, I hope I didn't just exit the app. Usually I don't do it, but I'm doing fairly well in my draft, so I'm going to buy a pack. I'm going to buy the Warlock Academy pack just to kind of celebrate that I'm doing the Warlocks. So kind of let's see how we do here. I'm not expecting anything great. That card's good. That card's good. That card's bad. Decent. Wow. 2 rats in the same pack. That's fantastic. I was being sarcastic. I got a couple of useful cards, so that's always good. I'm going for when I buy packs now, and I do when I have patience problems and stuff like that. I'm buying the Warlock Academy ones right now because I'm missing some of the foils from there, and you never know, I might get lucky enough to get some foils. So let's just push this old cleanup button here at the top. Alright, very good. I'm also going to grab out my little pen in case I decide to do some doodling here. So bear with me during the technical aspect of this. Alright, thank you. I don't need that. This thing can go down here on the... I can get rid of it off the screen altogether. Yay. Alright, so let's kind of go through the Warlock cards. Again, I'm going to touch on the... regular ones here first. I do have all of them. Just to kind of show. Again, all the Warlock cards. The only cards that I'm missing are those pirate ones that I covered earlier. Although there are a couple of disappointing things in regards to my collection as far as the Warlocks are concerned. It makes me sad. I'll touch on those too, and I'm going to be embarrassed here, but here we go. Don't have Rakanoth, obviously. But I'm missing Akamon, and that really ticks me off because about I don't know, maybe 6 months ago now, they gave Akamon out, a foil Akamon out before he got raised to legendary as a ranked reward, and that was the second time that they gave out foils for rank rewards. So whenever that is, the second month they did that, but I got the previous month's rewards instead of the foil Akamon. And then when they raised him in rarity, I didn't know they were going to do that. I didn't craft one before they did, and that ticks me off that I don't have this card. And I've had the shards to bank it before, but I just haven't been able to justify it because I still kick myself in the butt for not having it. Same thing with this one. I didn't know they were going to raise this to legendary, even though they changed the effect. They increased it from rare to legendary straight away, without raising what it does or changing anything about it. So I didn't craft this one either, which I'm really bummed out about. I wish I did, but I didn't. Again, a lot of the Warlock Academy foils I don't have for these, and the AOD foils. So this is probably the one where I'm missing the most foils, but I do have a lot of them. It just really bums me out that I don't have Akamon and Insanity, or whatever it's called now. So there's the list of what I got. So I guess I'll kind of take it from the top here. We'll start with Sacrifice. This card's really useful. I play this when I play Warlocks most of the time. Depending on what my strategy looks like, and in tournament I'm a little bit more leery to pick this card. It's pretty much sacrifice a unit, deal 4 damage. It turns pretty much anything into a nice fireball on the base. Fireball is not the right term, but you get the idea. A lot of times I use this to kind of get there. If I have a unit that's disabled with something like Slice and Dice, you can sacrifice it to get at least some value out of it. Since Warlocks, their primary aspect is getting the enemy base to 0 as fast as possible, this card really does a great job in facilitating that. Let's say you play Warlock Ninjas, you can drop Kuru on the base for 6, sacrifice and deal 10 damage. That's, a third of the base's health right away, right on turn 4. So sacrifice is really useful. Play this in Warlocks, especially if you're playing aggro. Zombie, this is a card I don't like. It just doesn't do enough. It's a 3/2, it has 2 movement, but it costs 0. So people look at that 0 cost and they think, wow, this card's, I can spam these out. Keep in mind, you only get 2 of these, and they will die to basically everything. This is a soulless lantern, but worse, because it's lacking 1 movement. So it'll even take a long time to get to the base. If you're going to play this card, you might as well just play Soulless Lantern instead. The 0 cost doesn't really do enough based on the stat line. If he was maybe a 4/3, that'd be totally different, but he's not. I don't play zombie ever. Army of the Damned. People experiment with this card to try to make it good. Army of the Damned just is kind of underwhelming. There's a Viking card that essentially does the same thing for, I think, 2 more gold. I forget the name. Battlecry. Or maybe it's only 1 gold. I forget. I don't play either card. But Army of the Damned can combo into some cute stuff like Rampage. You can Army of the Damned Rampage one of your units because it damages itself there. But this card just doesn't do enough. There's other cards in the game that do this same thing but better. So kind of keep that in mind. Don't play this card. People tried to make it work, but it's just underwhelming compared to some of the other cards that do the same thing but better. Cloak of Flames. Here's a card that people used to play. Now people don't play it so much, although you do see it in tournaments sometimes. People try to get cute and play Suit of Armor and throw some Cloak of Flames on it to really make it a pest there in the middle. But there used to be a deck where you would take a unit, buff its health super huge, and then run it and stand it right in front of the opponent's base and just watch them die as they can't deal with the unit. There's more hard removal in the game right now, so that'd be really, really difficult to do unless you were playing it on something like Dreymoth, and at that point, at the 10 gold to set up this combo, it's just not as useful. So Cloak of Flames used to be a lot better. It also used to draw a card. It doesn't anymore. It also used to damage your own units. It doesn't do that anymore, so that's kind of the trade-off here. If you can make it work, it's good, but good luck with all the hard removal that's out there right now. Here's a card, and I'm not really sure how I feel about it. This is Witchbolt. Deals 5 damage to anything that's not a castle. They changed some of the wordings on these cards since the last time I uploaded them, but as far as I know, the effects are all the same. Just the text is different. So it deals 5 damage to any target non-castle, so a unit or a building, and your opponent draws a card. Now, this card can be useful. I haven't really had enough experience playing it, so I don't really know how negative the opponent draws a card part of this is. But I don't like it just because I can't deal damage to the castle with this. Warlocks need to get there faster than their opponents. The late game, they just get outclassed by everything. So having a spell, it affects the board pretty significantly, and it does it early. It's also an answer to buildings that you can't deal with. But without it being even at least having the option to damage the castle, I don't really like it. But I would guess that it can see play if you don't really have any other better removal options. Consider this Incinerate. It costs less, but it has a drawback there. So kind of, tinker around with it. I think I might rather play this than Incinerate just because with Warlocks, I'm trying to get there as fast as I can, but at the same time, I don't want to give my opponent any answers. So I guess it's discretion. I need to test more with this, but from what I can tell, I would rather play something that has the opportunity to damage the castle. Alright, let's touch on a pretty good card. This is Altar of the Dark Lord. When this card first came out, I crafted 2 of them immediately, and it was fantastic. This card is really good. It takes every unit that dies and deals 2 damage to your enemy's base. So, every time you have a peasant militia die, no matter where it is, 2 damage to the enemy base. If you have a unit and you sacrifice, it deals 4 for the sacrifice and 2 for the altar. So, this card can be really useful. It can change the tide of games. It can do a lot of stuff for you. This is probably the only card in the game that if I'm building an Altar of the Dark Lord strategy, I would not play Brewery if I'm partnering it with Crusaders, of course. And Warlock's Crusaders has been very popular lately. So this card's really good. There's another card that does something similar, the Incinerator. I don't play both of them at the same time. I slightly prefer the Incinerator, but Alter will definitely get you there. This card can get out of hand very quickly. You don't need two of them in play at the same time either. One in play does just as much as having two in play. You would think 4 damage for every unit that dies is nasty, but you want to be able to at least keep some sort of board state, because if your opponent gets on your base, this thing is gone. And you need to keep this around if you want to get the value out of it. So I play 2 when I play this card, but I only play 1 on the field at the same time. I generally speaking only play the second one either if I can get there with a finishing combo with my units, or I have such overwhelming tempo that it's a win more. But generally speaking, if you play this card, play 2 of them, but only 1 on the field at the same time. You're gonna thank me later. Here's a card that used to be my favorite Warlock card. Now it's not. This card used to draw a card when you played it, and now it doesn't, and I'm kind of bummed out because I really liked it. I like throwing it on a vampire to make a really nasty creature right at my opponent's base very early in the game. I also used it as kind of a pseudo removal spell, deal 2 damage to an opponent and draw a card there. So it was really nice. It replaced itself. It had a lot of utility. You could either buff up one of your guys or kill an enemy guy, and draw a card or replace itself, but I guess they thought it was too good when it drew a card, so now it doesn't, and it's totally worthless. There are other cards that give attack buffs in the 2 slot that also give health buffs instead of making a detriment, but having the utility in order to be able to hit your opponent's units is nice. If you're going to play this card, don't play it without playing Vampire. Even if you don't put it on a Vampire, having that option or that threat is really nasty. I mean, vampires are really difficult to deal with, and I'll cover Vampire in a minute. But that's kind of my take on Bloodthirst. Here's a card that used to be played all the time. Now it's kind of outclassed by Darkfire. Breath of Fire used to deal 6 damage, if I recall correctly. They downed it to 5. Focus means you need to have a unit next to your target in order to make it work, so they have to be touching. So Breath of Fire can be very good, very powerful, but it's not used anymore. People generally favor Darkfire over this card. It used to be a catalyst in a deck that probably about 6 months ago that was almost unstoppable. So since it got toned down, people just don't play this card as much. It can definitely get you there. It deals 1/6 of your opponent's health with just 1 card, which is really strong. But because of you need to have something next to it, it limits its effectiveness. And as far as a removal for other units, I mean, this will get the job done. In tournament, I would pick it if I didn't really have something better to pick. But in constructed, there are other cards that I would rather run in the 2 slot than Breath of Fire. Although if you play it and you get use out of it, you won't be disappointed. Alright, touch on, this is your generic, burn spell. This is burn, deals 3 damage to a target. It can be the castle, it can be a unit, it can be a building. 2 gold, 3 damage. This kind of sets the standard for gold to damage ratios that you're kind of looking for out of the cards. Out of the direct damaging spells. That's kind of what the Warlocks specialize in. 3 damage isn't a whole heck of a lot, though. I don't play burn, although some players do. There are ways to buff that damage, as well as really make that 3 shine. But I would rather play something that has a little bit more utility than burn. Even though this can target everything, I'd rather play something that can do more than 3 damage at once. You'll find that this only deals 10% of your opponent's maximum health. With Warlocks, paying attention to maximum health and ratios, that kind of stuff is very important. So I like stuff that has the potential to do more damage at once, even if it's more damage spread out, like Detonate, for example. I like that card a lot better than Burn. They're not really related. I like Uncontrolled Burst better than Burn, just because it increases that damage a little bit. It gets a little bit more utility, and you're just that 1 damage closer to finishing the game. So that's really what the Warlocks focus on. This doesn't draw a card. It doesn't do anything. It's really basic. It's a starter card. Early in your playing career, you'll have some success with Burn, getting there with it. But once you start to get more and more cards, you'll notice that this card gets outclassed. Here's Chaotic Storm. They actually upped the cost from 1 to 2 not too long ago. This deals 1 damage to everything. Your castle, your opponent's castle, all the units on the field. It deals 1 damage to everything and it draws a card. So it replaces itself and it gets 1 damage on the opposing castle for 1. Keep in mind, I like to save this card when my opponents are playing the Rat King. Because it'll kill all of his rats tokens as well as it'll kill Sea Witch. So if you're playing against pirates, Pirate Warlock, get there with a bunch of tokens and poison and School of Pyromancy and Combustion, which I'll cover next. Having a Chaotic Storm is going to be really useful. I really like it that 1 damage is super useful, getting it on things. Sometimes it's just enough to take you over the top. It replaces itself. However, I've found lately when I've been playing Warlocks that this is kind of a dead card a lot of the times. I wish it was something else sometimes. So I guess it's really dependent on your playstyle. This card is very useful. Don't feel bad about playing this card. I usually don't. Sometimes I bet it's probably a 50-50 when I play Chaotic Storm. So just kind of keep that in mind. It's not an auto include, but it's not bad by any means. Let's touch on the next card. I kind of touched on it a second ago. This is Combustion. It essentially gives all of your units a School of Pyromancy for 1 turn that you can use multiple times. I believe they do stack. I take that back. They don't stack. They just increase the explosion damage. So if you use 2 of these at once, instead of dealing 2 and then 2 again, it would just deal 4. So that changes how it stacks with poison, because if you use combustible poison and then cast 2 combustions, you'd get one toggle of poison, and it would deal, if the hits were separate, it would deal whatever your normal attack was and add the poison, and then 4 for the combustion, because 2 from the regular effect, 2 from the poison, and then another 4 for the combustion, 2 for the regular effect, 2 for the poison. However, since I believe they add, it would just deal whatever your regular attack is to get the poison, and then if you play 2 of them at once, it would just deal 4 for the combustions all at the same time, and then an additional 2, so it would show up 6 on the screen. So that's kind of a bummer with Combustion that they don't stack with the School of Pyromancy or anything like that, but I mean, they're the same effect, and I think if they did that, it would be a little bit too strong. I don't play Combustion, and if you do, you need to have a very specialized deck to fit it in. It can be very surprising, and your opponent can't be expecting it, can be not expecting it, but you need to have a lot of units to really get the value out of this card. And in Warlocks, generally speaking, you don't have a lot of units unless they're very, very small. And in that case, your guys are going to die anyway. It'll help get you some additional damage on the base and maybe clear out some units, but you'd be sacrificing a lot of your board state. Keep having the blockers and the board presence to, keep your altar alive, or your incinerator, which I'll touch on in a little while, alive. But if you're playing like a pirate warlock poison deck, Combustion's an auto include there, but it's not an auto include in everything. Very situational when you'd want Combustion. A lot of times, if I draw it, because I've only experimented with it a couple of times, I just wish it was something else. Let's touch on Darkbolt. This is probably an auto include in every Warlock deck. That used to cost 1, deal 1 damage and draw a card. I actually think it got better when they increased the damage to 2 and draw a card, because that's just, since it was an auto include at 1 for 1 damage, it's definitely an auto include at 2 for 2 damage. It replaces itself. You can play this early to kind of filter through your deck, and since it does 2 now as opposed to 1, it's just that much easier to get to 30 damage. And that's really what the Warlocks focus on. How fast can you take your opponent down to 0? With Darkbolt being increased in cost as well as the increase in damage, it just makes it that much easier. This is an auto include in Warlocks. It's a great early play. It's a great late play. You're never going to be disappointed with Darkbolt. Just keep in mind, you're almost always going to want to throw this on the castle or throw it on a unit. I almost never throw this on a building, because Warlocks have some better answers to deal with buildings, and especially with your other faction as well. You're not really going to have a hard time dealing with them, and I'll kind of touch on some of those alternatives in a little while. Alright, let's touch on Fireball. This is a card that used to be broken. Now it's hardly ever played. Fireball used to deal 4 damage to everything, and then they kind of nerfed it and tweaked it and nerfed it again. Now this only deals damage to units and nearby enemy units, but it only deals 3. 3 damage won't kill hardly anything. It'll kill some peasant militias, it'll kill soulless lanterns, it'll kill the Rat King and Rat tokens, and that's just about it. And flying books. That's about it. And a lot of times players aren't going to have them clumped up. So usually this is going to be a 1-for-1, but one fireball to kill 1 unit, but the unit that you kill is hardly going to be a problem for you at any point in the game. So don't play fireball. It just doesn't do enough. It doesn't deal damage to castles or buildings, and warlocks have better options than this. If a spell can't deal damage to the castle, generally speaking, you don't want to play it in warlocks, just because you're really trying to get your opponent dead as fast as possible. Alright, let's touch on another card that I included in about half of my Warlock decks as well. This is Grotesque Offering. Like Sacrifice, this requires you to, well, sacrifice a unit. So at the cost of a unit, you can draw 2 cards. So compare this to Divine Knowledge and Crusaders. It costs 1 less gold, but you have to sacrifice a unit. But that sacrifice sometimes is an asset. And because warlocks have ways to temporarily take control of opposing units, and you can sacrifice your opposing units and then draw 2 cards, which is great. You can sacrifice a unit that's disabled. You can sacrifice a unit and get triggers off of Altar or Incinerator. So that sacrificing a unit sometimes is not bad. So it has that, and you draw 2 cards. Warlocks are kind of lacking in the draw power, because if too many of their cards were cantrips, Warlocks would be overpowered because it deal damage to the base, draw a card, and it just kind of keeps the fuel going. So this card, I include it in some of my Warlock decks. In Mono Warlocks, I absolutely include this. But if I'm splashing another faction like Crusaders, I probably wouldn't play this, and I would play Dragonlore instead because it's just so much better. But, you know, that sacrifice isn't necessarily a bad thing, so keep that in mind. Mark of Detonation, people play this card. I guess I understand why. I'm not a huge fan of it. This card can backfire really heavily. Mark of Detonation, essentially, when your guy blows up, it deals 5 damage to everything. That includes allied units and enemy units. It includes your castle, your buildings, your opponent's castle, your opponent's buildings. Deals 5 damage to everything nearby. So essentially the range of a Great Cleave. This card can be useful. A lot of people like to rush a unit right in front of the base, throw a Mark of Detonation on it, and make your opponent, you know, trade down and really kind of mess himself up there. However, since knockback is a little bit more prevalent against Vikings, this card is dead. If you throw a unit down with Mark of Detonation, throw it by your opponent's base, they have the potential to knock it back to your base and kill it and just deal 5 damage to all of your stuff, so it completely backfires. Keep that in mind when you play this card. Although it's not bad, I don't like it, but I see a lot of people play it and have success with it, so I guess it's just kind of personal preference. Let's touch on Mischievous Imp. I touched on this in a couple of the other categories. This is your 2-drop for the Warlocks. This card is amazing. This is an auto-include 2 of in every single Warlock deck you should make. It awakens and deals 3 damage to the opposing castle. So think about this. What Burn does, Mischievous Imp does it, but it's on a body. So it's just better in every way. You get a guy out of it. You get 3 damage to the base. You know, if this can rush up in the base right at the beginning, that's 5 damage right away. That's already 1/6 of your opponent's health. So they really have to worry about this guy. Plus, there's ways to get that awaken again. You can bounce him with ninjas. You can play Headmaster, which we'll kind of cover in a little while. So this card's auto-include 2 of every time. Won't be disappointed. Never be sad to see an imp. Play 2 of them always. Pillar of Flame, this is a card that I've experimented with a few times. I've picked it in tournaments, that kind of stuff. It just is underwhelming. You think that this has huge damage potential, and it actually used to. It got nerfed pretty considerably, not recently, but you know, a little while ago. It deals 2, it explodes for 2 at the beginning of every turn, so it doesn't do anything the turn it comes into play. Your opponent has a chance to respond, and then it does 2. So your opponent, all they have to do is really attack this thing and it dies. You place it in their base, so it's really easy to kill. Usually you're only going to get 2 damage out of this if you get any damage out of it at all, and it also gives your opponent a chance to kind of buff up his units, especially if he's playing ninjas. You need to watch out for that, things like training grounds. So Pillar of Flame, like Pillar of Annoyance, not so great. Don't play it. Looks like in butthole with diarrhea coming out of it. Alright, this is Uncontrolled Burst. They changed this card completely not too long ago. It used to have Flank, deal 7 damage or something like that, where you needed to have 2 units next to a target. It's totally worthless. Now this card's great. It deals 4 damage to any target, and 2 damage to your own castle. So 4 damage to the opponent's castle, a unit, anything like that. Things that this can kill that your Burn can't. Imp is the big one that sticks out of mind. This kills an imp, where Burn would not. Uncontrolled Burst is perfect for Warlocks. It deals 4 damage straight up to your opponent's face, but it deals 2 damage to yourself. But use your life, your castle's health as a resource. A lot of people are bad at that. Sometimes letting your opponent get a free shot on your castle is the best decision. And Warlocks, playing this but getting a little bit of retaliation from it isn't bad. You won't be missing that 2 health. I mean, how many games have you played where the game finished 2-0? Almost none. Usually when players win the game, it's a lot less close than that, at least on the scoreboard. So the 2 damage is negligible. Ignore it. But the Uncontrolled Burst, the 4 damage is nuts. It can be buffed by some things we'll kind of touch on in a minute. And you should play this card in Warlocks. You won't be disappointed. Vampire. Here's another 2-drop unit. Vampire kind of got the short end of the stick. He used to be neutral. He used to heal no matter for how much damage or how much attack that he had. So if you had a Warlock with 6 attack, he would attack and heal for 6. It made him very difficult to deal with. I believe he also used to cost 4 and had increased stats. He was like a 3/7 or something like that. Vampire now kind of got the short straw because he shares a gold slot with Imp. Generally speaking, you don't want to play both, and I play Imp over Vampire, which kind of stinks for Vampire because he's actually really good. If you don't have Imps or you want to play something different, Vampire is a really good choice. He's very difficult to deal with. Generally speaking, your opponents will use a removal spell on the Vampire because he's so hard to deal with, since he, when he attacks, he heals. Keep in mind that retaliation damage will happen before he heals. But Vampire, he's really good. Play him. You won't be disappointed. Acolyte. This card's really frail, but he has a devastating ability. It makes all your damaging cards deal an extra 1 damage, and that's not just your Warlock cards. That means Burn, instead of dealing 3, will deal 4. Uncontrolled Burst will deal 5 damage to your opponent's whatever you hit, and 3 damage to your castle. Think of Viking spells like Lightning Bolt. Lightning Bolt would deal 4 damage. Flash Grenade and Ninjas would deal 3 damage with this card. So your damaging cards deal an additional 1 damage. That's really powerful. It stacks up and it adds up very quickly. He's also a ranged unit, but he is very frail. Opponents generally will try to get rid of this, but it's usually placed in the back corner. Although being placed in the black corner, it doesn't really have effect on the board. So you kind of need to be careful where you play him. I find myself not playing him more often than I do. And that's just because he's so frail. He's easy to destroy. And he doesn't affect the board. At 3, I want something that's going to affect the board. He's going to come down and actually matter. Acolyte doesn't really matter right away, although if he sits for too long, he's really nasty. So be careful with this card. Generally, I find other stuff to be more useful in the 3 slot than Acolyte, but if your opponent has an Acolyte, make sure you do everything that you can to get rid of it immediately, or he's going to make up his value and then some. Touch on Demonic Rage. People talk about this card on the forums all the time. This card seems a lot better than it actually is. It's not that great. It essentially gives a unit double attack, not double strike. So it'll take a unit's base attack of 6 and increase it to 12. It'll take a unit's base attack of 2 and increase it to 4. It'll take a unit's base attack of 5 and increase it to 10. However, if you use a buff on a unit, and let me get my handy dandy pen out. Let's see. Hopefully this doesn't stop my recording. Alright. So, I think I might need to change the color to green. Yep. Hold on. Sorry, guys. Okay. So, if I have a unit with a base attack of 4... Oops. I'm going to scale this up. Alright. If I have a unit with a base attack of 4, right? Let's say I have a swordsman. That's a good example. Alright. And I cast a demonic rage on the swordsman. That would change it to an 8/9. Okay? So, there's that. Alright, let's take my swordsman again. It's a 4/9. And then I use a spell like Might of the Minotaur. M-O-T-M. That's a Viking card. It gives +5 attack. Alright. And I cast it on the swordsman. It raises it to a 9/9. Yay. Alright, and then I cast Demonic Rage on it, thinking I'm going to get in there for a ton of damage. And it goes up to a 13/9. You're like, wait a minute. Double attack? That's supposed to double his attack, right? Well, yes and no. It doubles his base attack. So even if you buff him further with other buff spells, it only increases his base attack. So that's a limitation that people need to be aware of with Demonic Rage. It only increases their base attack. At least as of the last time I tested it, and I could be completely wrong. But the last time I played with Demonic Rage, it only increased their base attack. So keep that in mind and be careful, especially since there's no longer an undo button. Be careful with Demonic Rage. Alright. Demonic Rage isn't very good because it only increases the base attack and it increases damage dealt to the unit by 2, so it makes it really easy to destroy your unit. That damage also includes retaliation damage and global spells like Chaotic Storm. But it can be a surprise for people. Generally, in the 3 spot, I'd rather have something more useful like the next card we're going to talk about. I don't think Demonic Rage is that great. People think it's better than it is, but it's not. Don't play Demonic Rage. Alright, let's touch on Detonate. I really like this card, but you need to be careful when you use it. If you have the initiative, which means if you are attacking, and as Warlocks, early in the game, you should. If you have the initiative and if you are attacking, and especially if you have an Acolyte on the field, this card is nasty. It deals 4 damage to everything nearby. So, castles, buildings, units, everything. Detonate is nasty. If used at the right time, this card is brutal. However, keep in mind it does have a pretty significant cost. In the 3 slot, you also have to discard a card. So it's costing 2 cards to have this great effect. If you have an Acolyte if you play Acolyte, you definitely should be playing Detonate because the difference between dealing 4 damage and dealing 5 damage is significant. 5 damage will kill buildings, as well as a ton of units like Vampire, where 4 damage will not. That's, again, don't think of it as the difference of 1 between 4 and 5. Think of it as a 20% increase. It increases the damage by 20%. So, Detonate is super duper nasty. I guess, depending on how you do your math, it could be 25%. Depends on how you calculate your ratios. That's beside the point. Detonate's super nasty, but you need to be careful when you play this. I don't play... Even though it costs 3, I don't play it on turn 3. I usually wait in the game for a better opportunity to cast Detonate than on turn 3, because usually turn 3 is not the time to do it. So don't let, your standard gold curve dictate when you play some of these cards. Usually it's better to hold on to Detonate until later in the game when you're going to get a lot of value out of it. You don't want to play this card and only hit one thing, which is usually going to be the castle, unless that 4 damage is going to get you the win, in which case play it then. Just be careful with this card. Usually playing it on turn 3 is not the best idea. Let's talk about Fire Whirl. Fire Whirl can be really powerful. Think of the what is that? The Aura of Light or whatever. The Crusader thing that dealt 3 damage to everything around it and healed for 3 as well. Fire Whirl's kind of a better version of that. It's like Breath of Fire, but deals damage to other stuff. But you know, you don't necessarily have to have a unit right next to it. This can hit multiple things. It can be a very big surprise. This card's fairly useful in tournament mode, not so great in constructed. Just that difference between 4 and 5 is so important. And since you need to have a unit close to your opponent's castle in order to actually damage the castle with this, people will use it in other situations. They'll have a tendency to trade down with this card. What that means is they'll take a unit, they'll move it next to another unit, they'll play Fire Whirl to deal the damage, and then they'll attack, and then both units will kill each other. And it's essentially a 2-for-1 for your opponent, advantage opponent. So Fire Whirl can be a big surprise. A lot of people won't see it coming. A lot more useful in tournament than constructed. But if you get it in tournament, it's not a bad thing. Just make sure you're careful when you play it and you're using it in situations that are going to be positive for you and not positive for your opponent. Touch on Firestorm. This is a card that's gone through several changes in the past. It used to deal more damage, that kind of stuff. The cost was lower, the damage was lowered. I don't think this card does enough for what it is. There's a card that's coming up here that I play over this card 100% of the time. I don't play Firestorm very often, however, that doesn't mean it's bad. The 2 damage is kind of weak, but if your opponent has an overwhelming board state, the 2 damage can add up with some other things. It'll allow you to trade with your units a little bit more efficiently since they'll be damaged. A big reason I don't like this card is because Brewery gives +2 health. This just kind of neutralizes the brewery's effect on just the units that are in play. Sorry guys, I got a cold. I've been fighting that in for like a long ass time. Okay. So, I don't really like this card. But I guess if you don't have any better options, you can play it. I just think it's underwhelming. Especially since Warlocks try to get to the castle, spending 3 gold to deal 2 damage to the castle. Kind of weak. Alright, let's touch on Immolate. This card's actually fairly good. Think Fireball, but better. Immolate deals 3 damage to everything nearby. That includes the unit that you enchant with it. So if you're thinking, I want to get a suit of armor and buff them up to Oblivion and throw Immolates and Cloak of Flames and all that other stuff on them and just watch them explode, keep in mind that Immolate will do the damage to itself as well. Whatever unit that you enchant with Immolate will be damaged by 3. That's not a bad thing. You can throw this on your opponent's units and it'll deal 3 damage to the opponent's unit and everything nearby. If your opponent has a slow unit that's not very optimally placed, you can throw Immolate on it. You can deal a bunch of damage to units as well as castles and buildings and all sorts of great stuff. Immolate's also a removal spell, so eventually that unit will die. Just keep in mind when you enchant a unit with Immolate, it triggers on your opponent's turn, which is great. However, if the Immolate in one explosion doesn't kill your unit, expect whatever you hit with it to rush straight at your castle. That unit's going to try to trade itself off and get some value out of itself as soon as possible. So be careful when you play this card, although it can be very effective. Touch on Incinerate. This is your generic kill stuff spell for Warlocks. This card's useful all the way up to the top level. Again, compared to Witch Bolt, I'm not sure which one's better at this point because I need to do a little bit more in-depth testing. However, Incinerate deals 5 damage to anything, which means it can kill a building or a unit as long as it's 5 damage or less. However, it doesn't deal damage to the castle. In strategies where Warlock is really your support faction and you're playing other stuff, Incinerate's a pretty good play. If you're playing mono Warlocks, I would probably play Incinerate too because you really need to worry about some of the stuff on the board. But since a lot of the powerful units are at 6 health at this point in the game, think Voodoo Shaman or whatever, or Witch Doctor, that's his name. Think Witch Doctor, think Faithful Drake, think the Warlock Drake, which we'll touch on in a minute. 6 is kind of the new 5. at this point. However, this does kill a lot of great stuff, including buildings. So if you need an all-purpose answer, play Incinerate. You won't be disappointed with it. Pick it especially in tournament unless you have a better pick, because this card you'll get the value out of it. All right, let's touch on probably. Warlocks have a lot of really good buildings. I really like Incinerator. Incinerator used to do something completely different. I won't really touch on that. I don't want to bring up bad memories for people. But Incinerator's fantastic. I like this card better than Altar because it deals 1 damage to all enemies. That includes the castle as well as buildings and units. The 1 damage, you might be thinking 1 damage, that's totally worthless. But if the Incinerator sits in play for long enough, it will win the game. Because your units will always trade up. They'll always deal damage. They'll do damage to units that aren't even in play yet, which means they're too far back to be useful, or they're poorly positioned, stuff like that. So it'll really help keep the pressure off you a lot better than Altar will, because Altar doesn't actually affect the board, it just affects the castle. I like Incinerate better. Comparing Incinerate to Altar, this helps you control the board and not get killed while you're killing your opponent. Well, Altar just kills your opponent as fast as humanly possible. I don't play both at the same time. I do play Incinerator over Altar usually. Incinerator is just going to give you a ton of value. You might not think that one is very useful, but let's say you have 2 Incinerators in play because you've got enough control. That means every time one of your units dies, Firestorm. Unit die, Firestorm. Sacrifice, Firestorm. You're going to get so many Firestorms out of this thing, you're not going to know what to do with yourself. It's really good. Play Incinerator. You won't be disappointed. Generally speaking, I think Incinerator is better than Altar. Alright, Mage Apprentice. This is a card I actually kind of like. A lot of people don't. It's the only reason I like it is because it has 3 range. It can be a very useful defensive unit. However, you do need to be careful for if you have Acolyte in play. This will come into play with one additional damage dealt to it. Global, since you're playing Chaotic Storm, that kind of stuff. Chaotic Storm will damage your Mage Apprentice. However, this does have the nice aspect of having 3 range, so you can throw some buffs on this thing, like Viking knockback cards, that kind of stuff, and he makes a very good defender. Generally speaking, on the attack, Mage Apprentice isn't going to do that great. However, on the defense, Mage Apprentice does his job well. I think in tournament he's definitely a force to be reckoned with. In constructed, I think he's just a little bit too frail at the 3 spot in order to make himself that useful. All right, let's touch on a card that used to be good, now it isn't. This is Myopic Power. I always thought it was Niopic Power with an N for the longest time, but I guess it's not. First things first, this card used to draw a card, now it doesn't. It gives a range unit +4 attack and -1 range. It is permanent. This card used to be played a lot more often when Pyromancer had 3 range, and the explosion wasn't limited by his as explosive 3. Instead, it was a factor of his attack power, so this made it really nasty. As well as there were some units that you could equip with this and make them really, really nasty. Plus, since it replaced itself, you didn't feel so bad about playing it. Now it's just totally worthless. It doesn't do anything. There are hardly any ranged units that have more than 2 range. And if you're taking a ranged unit and buffing them up, you're essentially making them a melee unit. And since the ranged units generally have a lower stat line, it essentially would just make it an average melee unit. So Niopic Power just doesn't do anything. Don't play it. Wall of Fire. This is a card I really like. This is the last starter card that you'll get when you're leveling with Warlocks, and for good reason. Wall of Fire has a really unique AoE where it deals 5. It hits 5 tiles in a straight vertical line, so it'll hit here, 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 but it won't go like this. None of that. Just a straight line of squares. Again, if this is a grid, it'll deal damage to these ones here, but it won't deal damage here and here, and like your standard AoE box, it won't do that. So Wall of Fire is great because it can hit the castle as well as buildings. You can kill multiple units with this because people think they have their units spaced out enough not to be chained. Then you hit Wall of Fire. Wall of Fire does kill books, which is it's used frequently for that. I really like it because it can deal damage to buildings as well as the castle. Generally, dealing a little bit of damage to the buildings is good. It makes them a lot easier to kill with other things like Firestorm if that's what you play, or the Incinerator. I like Wall of Fire. I play it in my burn heavy decks. But if I'm not playing a burn heavy deck and I'm using Warlock as more of a support faction, I don't play it. So make a long story short, Wall of Fire can be very useful when you level up your Warlock's faction enough in order to get this card. It'll be a good fit for you. Play this card. Keep in mind this card's really useful too if your opponents have a ton of stuff sitting on the back row trying to stay out of range or set up some sort of crazy combo. Hitting everything on the back row of your opponent's base, including the square directly behind the castle, can be very devastating and destroy a ton of units. If you can destroy 2 units with this card at once, I usually play it there instead of hitting the castle. But if I can destroy 2 things, I guess at once, or if I can hit the castle and destroy 1 other thing, I play it then too. Arson, I really like this card. A lot of people don't. This card does not see enough play as far as I'm concerned. I think if you're playing Warlocks, you should play Arson. You can deal the 2 damage straight to the castle, as well as everything around it. So think Fireball, but a little bit weaker, or Firestorm, but a little limited. However, Arson also can completely destroy a building. So it'll deal 5 damage to a building, 2 damage to the castle, and then an additional 2 damage to everything nearby. So it can get there and finish off some other units. It can destroy a building, finish off some units, and deal damage to the castle. This has a ton of upside. I really think Arson should be played as at least a one of in every Warlock deck, just because it's got so much utility. Think Purify, but from a straight Warlock perspective. I think Purify is probably a bit of a better choice, but I would be willing to argue that because being able to deal the damage to the units as well, sometimes that's just enough to finish them off, especially with all the Warlock's AoEs. This thing can be buffed by Acolyte and stuff. I think Arson's fantastic. Almost every single deck's got a building in play. Some of them are a lot more deadly than others, and being able to take out the building as well as deal damage to other stuff around it, super useful. Play Arson. Let's touch on Darkfire. A lot of people play this card, and for good reason. Darkfire is really nasty. It deals 7 damage to everything nearby, and it just deals damage to enemies, so if you have allies nearby, they don't care. It also deals damage to the castle, so 4 gold for 7 castle damage, as well as if you have something directly in front of the castle, it'll blow up all the buildings, it'll blow up any units that are nearby. You'll get a ton of value out of Darkfire, although almost 100% of the time you'll be sacrificing the unit that you play, although it doesn't explicitly say that. If you do have a huge unit, I don't know, Craxus or something like that, it'll survive, or Central Golem will survive with this, assuming it's not damaged first. But Darkfire, you're going to get a ton of value out of this card. Generally speaking, you'll trade 2 of your stuff for 3 of your opponent's stuff. You'll do a ton of damage to the base. You'll totally mess up their setup. People play around Darkfire. This card's really good. A lot of people, at the end of the game when they get to 9 health, they'll play Headless Horseman, rush it in, deal 3 damage to the base, Darkfire. That's 10 damage to the base right away, kills everything nearby. It's super nasty. Play Darkfire. I play Darkfire in probably 60% of the Warlock decks I play, and that's just because it's not always useful. Sometimes I'm not trying to rush my opponent's base, even though I've kind of specified time and time again during this guide that you should be focusing on, getting your opponent down to 0 as quick as possible. Darkfire is a really good choice. Play it. Fire Drake, I think this is this one and the Poison Drake are probably 1 and 1A. I think they're tied right now as far as usefulness. It depends on what day you ask me whether I like Poison Drake or Fire Drake better. The other Drakes are just inferior compared to these guys. Fire Drake is so good because it has that chain effect, which is, kind of the first time that an effect that was generally restricted to one faction in Vikings has been opened up. Kind of except for the Wanderer that kind of got changed, but Fire Drake is nasty. the 2 damage chaining to everything, and it also triggers as a separate hit. So if you use it with poison, which I've kind of said that a lot, the poison decks, the Pirate Warlock poison decks are pretty nasty because there's a lot of synergy between the cards, as you've seen so far. But Fire Drake is really nasty. It'll deal 5 damage to whatever you attack with it. The 6 butt ensures that it survives because a lot of the units won't have 5 attack at this point in the game, especially. There's 2 that do, I think. So Fire Drake, you're definitely going to get some value out of it, chaining an attack to the castle or to some other units, and just really getting a lot of value out of this card. Fire Drake should be played all the time in Warlocks. He should be your 4-drop unless you need to play a spell or a Darkfire or something like that. Even if you don't play him on turn 4, pretty much anytime you play Fire Drake, he's a threat. So Fire Drake is really nasty. Play him all the time in Warlocks. You won't be disappointed. Let's touch on Fire Strike. This card's fairly good in tournament. Fairly good at low-level Warlock play. Top-level Warlock play, you won't play this. You want to play something that can damage your opponent, like the next card I'm going to talk about. But this deals 5 damage to a target and then 5 damage to that same target again on the next turn. So it deals 10 damage to a target. It can kill basically anything in the game. There's hardly anything that has 10 health. With Crusaders, you can buff up your health, obviously, but Fire Strike, if you're having trouble with some bigger units, Fire Strike will kill them. I think Slice and Dice is more useful than Fire Strike, but that's in a different faction. If you need something to kill something huge in Warlocks, since your guys aren't very big and aren't very burly, Fire Strike will be able to take out your big guys, as well as it can substitute for Incinerate, but this has a little bit more upside than Incinerate. However, Incinerate costs 1 gold less. Sometimes you need that removal in the turn earlier, but Fire Strike will definitely get the job done. Don't hesitate playing this if you don't have some better options. Like I said, in low-level Warlock play, Fire Strike will be useful. Once you start getting more and more cards, Fire Strike will be less and less useful. Good when you're a new player. Flames of Eternity. This is a card that I'm seeing more and more of. To be honest with you, I've played with this card 1 time, so I don't really have a good gauge on this card yet. However, I see it a ton. It definitely gets its value. I think that this card should be played in Warlocks, but I haven't really built a really heavy Warlock deck lately. I've got a burn deck that I play, but I haven't really updated it too much or rebuilt it since AOD. It's just kind of the same deck that I've always had, and it does the same job that it always has. Flames of Eternity is pretty good on paper. Again, I see it a lot, so a lot of people must think it's good in practice too. But then again, I see Sentry Golem or fucking Suit of Armor a lot too. So I guess I can't really use that as a good indicator. But Flames of Eternity is really good. It doesn't draw a card, but it draws a guy. So you can get lucky and get a Warlock Drake or a Poison Drake, or you can get unlucky and get a Spirit Drake. But even then, in Warlocks, Spirit Drake isn't that bad because it has that 4 movement, which will let you get in and use some Darkfire, but you never know, you might get Ice Drake and then just be sad. How in Drake decks, the Crusader Warlock Drake deck right now is fairly popular. So this will just give you more opportunities to get more Drakes that you can use with your Dragon Temples and stuff like that. So this card replaces itself. It can deal 3 damage to the castle compared to Burn. Think of Burn, draw a card, but it's always a guy. So Warlocks generally don't play very many guys. Think 12 units in a deck. This is a way to get a damage spell in, as well as get a unit in your hand as well, and sometimes that can be really valuable. I think this card should be played on paper. In practice, I don't really have a good answer for you. This is one that I'm going to be testing with once I really start getting into my playtest mode. Since I did hit rank 1, I now have the opportunity to experiment with whatever the heck I want with, and I don't have to worry about my rank dropping too low and really have to battle back at the end of the season. Professor Headwood, this is the substitute for Firestorm that I was talking about before. This card should be played over Firestorm 100% of the time. A lot of players have this card, and you might be kind of frustrated if you're a new player and you're playing against Warlocks, and they always seem to have Professor Headwood. There's a reason for that. When the Warlock Academy expansion first came out, They gave everybody 1 round of it for free, and that round you got Professor Headwood. So essentially, this was a free legendary for all the players. If people didn't go into the campaign and get Professor Headwood before you changed it, then they're SOL. They didn't get one. But even players that don't have very many cards or don't have very many legendaries, if they were around when the Warlock Academy expansion came out, they've got Professor Headwood. So expect to see this guy all the time. And he's deserving of his legendary status. He's an auto-include in Warlocks. He's a fantastic defender, keeps you from getting overrun and killed, wipes a lot of stuff. People will be hesitant to play stuff because they don't want it to come in damaged. Headwood is great. He deals 2 damage to the base. There are ways to trigger that awaken effect multiple times. He's really good. You should play him if you've got him, and if you don't have him, you should try to get him. He's really good. Alright, let's talk about Pyromancer. This is kind of sad Pyromancer right here. He used to be so much better. Now he's just underwhelming. That explosive 3 is nice. He's at 2 health. He's a 3/2 for 4. So he's really lacking as far as the raw stats department. Since people generally space their units out a little bit better now, because there's a lot of chaining effects that they need to watch out for, Pyromancer's lost some of his luster. That doesn't mean he's bad, however, you just need to place him right in order to make him useful. In draft, having a couple Pyromancers isn't bad, but in constructed, he just gets outclassed by things like Professor Headwood. I mean, let's compare the 2 units. Look at the stat lines, look at the effects, same gold cost, which one would you rather have? I'll take the Professor almost every time. So, he just kind of gets outclassed, but in low-level play, Pyromancer is a pretty good choice, especially since your opponent's spacing isn't going to be that great. Pyromancer can get you some value. Let's touch on Rite of Fire. This card was extremely broken, now less so. A lot of people play this card. I sometimes play it, sometimes I don't. It depends on the deck I'm using at the time. This can get there, and the damage can get out of hand very quickly. But it kind of takes a lot to set up to really make this card shine, and usually if you're going to take the time to set it up, you'll just have better luck using other stuff to kill your opponent. But don't get me wrong, if you need something that has the potential to get 6 or 7 damage on the base with fairly low setup, Rite of Fire will get you there. It'll do a lot of damage. It's fairly gold efficient when you can make it work, and almost 100% of the time you're going to want to use this on your enemy's castle. You're rarely going to want to use this on a unit because it's just kind of a waste at that point. Like I said, with Warlocks, you're just trying to get your opponent down to 0 as fast as possible. Rite of Fire is kind of on the top end as far as damage potential goes. So Rite of Fire is not a bad play. I don't really like it because I like using other stuff instead of setting up a bunch of units to kill my opponent. But to each his own. It sees play. But usually there's better stuff. School of Pyromancy, this is arguably the best building in the game. Any factions, whatever, I think Warlocks by far have the best buildings. Altar's good, Incinerator's good, School of Pyromancy's good, Eye of Flame is good. There's a ton of good buildings. Tower of Fire's good. There's a ton of good buildings in Warlock, so you really kind of need to limit yourself. School of Pyromancy is probably not the one you want to cut. School of Pyromancy will get you there. Having that 2 explosion on everything. Compared to combustion, this is permanent. It affects all the units every turn that this is in play. So this card is nasty. This should be played all the time in your Warlock decks. If you don't have it, try to get one if you're a Warlock fan. This can deal a ton of damage to your opponent's base. Like if you damage anything around your opponent's base, School of Pyromancy will also damage the base. Keep in mind that if you have a unit with Pierce and it attacks 2 things at once, it only deals the explosion damage around the first unit, the one that actually would retaliate against you, not the unit behind it. So you're not going to get, like a a 3x4 grid or anything like that. It's always going to be a 3x3. The explosion will hit the unit directly behind it, but the unit directly behind it won't explode as well. So keep that in mind. I've never really had an issue with it, but new players might not know about that functionality. But School of Pyromancy is insane. Play this all the time. You won't be disappointed. Everything is great with School of Pyromancy. Yes. Yes on School of Pyromancy. Best building in the game. Tower of Fire is fairly good. You generally need to have the initiative to play Tower of Fire and make it really shine. One of the things I like to do with Tower of Fire is if I'm playing it with ninjas, I play Tranquility and then Tower of Fire on the same turn if I can get away with it. That 5 damage to a random enemy and 2 damage to itself. Essentially, this is 3 incinerates, but it can damage the castle. So think of auto incinerate every single turn, but it can damage the base. So incinerate, incinerate, incinerate. It can destroy some units. It can mess up your opponent's spacing. This has the potential to deal 15 damage to your opponent's castle. Obviously, there's some caveats to that. Tower of Fire needs some accurate setup in order to make it work, but if you can make it work, this card is really nasty. It's kind of an advanced card to really make shine, so be careful with Tower of Fire. But if used in the right way, it can be nasty. Devastate. This card's fairly good in tournaments. Not so great in constructed, although I've been surprised by a Devastate. Somebody played it against me in top level play. I was probably around 3 or 4 at the time, and someone played a Devastate, and it was, well, devastating. It killed a bunch of buildings that I had that were really supporting my team. I sacrificed a bunch of tempo to play some buildings, and I was just starting to kind of regain myself here. They played a Devastate, wiped out all my buildings at once, and then just stomped my base in. So Devastate can be nasty if you make it work, but if your opponent's not playing a building heavy strategy, this card's kind of weak. I prefer Arson to Devastate. However, you kind of pick whatever you want. Devastate won't deal damage to units. It'll only deal damage to castles and buildings. That's it. That's kind of why I like Arson better. But Devastate's not a terrible choice. I just think Arson's so much better. Flame Knight. This is kind of the high drop epic card. Another competitor for that 5 spot. So compared to Knight of the Flowers and Sentry Golem, there is Flame Knight as well. Flame Knight removes status effects from the target. When it says status effect, that means things like buffs. So if I threw sharpened blades on something and I attacked it with Flame Knight, the sharpened blades would go away. If I played Knight of the Flowers, if my opponent played Knight of the Flowers and buffed this guy by 1/1, if I attacked it with Flame Knight, that 1/1 would go away. If my opponent played Lightning Blade on a unit and gave him a card that gave him +5 lightning, and I attacked it with Flame Knight, the Lightning Blade would go away. However, if I attack something with innate lightning like Ragnar, the lightning stays. So be careful with the wording there. On Flame Knight is fairly good if you don't have the other 5 drops. Flame Knight will kind of get you there. But I like the neutral 5 drops better than Flame Knight. I play Sentry Golem and Warlocks because he combos well with the Warlock cards, with the kind of the Awaken thing and Headmaster Saurus, which we're going to cover next. So I like other things in the 5 spot, but if you don't have them, Flame Knight in the 5 spot's not going to be a bad choice for you. Headmaster Saurus makes your Awaken units super nasty. Anything that has Awaken, it awakens again. Even if it hasn't awakened already, it will awaken, and then the next turn it will awaken again. This doesn't just like when I first saw this card, I thought it, kind of reset it and made it so once the next turn goes by, they will awaken. No, it's instant awaken. So you can have a Sentry Golem out there, that's a 7/8 for 4 movement. Play Headmaster Saurus. He turns into a 13/8 with 6 movement. So things can get out of hand very quickly with Headmaster Saurus. That'll do a lot of damage. Your imps will awaken again. Your Sentry Golems will awaken again. Shodan, if you're playing them, will awaken again. Headmaster or Professor Headwood will awaken again. So having Getting the Awaken Again effect is really nasty. Plus, he has 3 range, 4 attack, 4 health. He's a good body on its own. Plus, that effect makes him really nasty. That's why I play Sentry Golem with Warlocks. Play this card if you've got it, even if you're not playing Awaken spells, because it's very useful as far as the even just the stat line is really good. Cycle of Destruction, good in Tournament, not so great in Constructed. Dealing 6 damage for 6 to something that's not a castle, meh. You can draw a card, but in Constructed, you want to play very control-y and very slow. You want to win the game. You want to win the late game. You're rarely going to win a game with burn spells for Warlocks, so you're going to need to have these board control-y stuffs. This will kill your Faithful Drakes, your Fire Drakes, that kind of stuff. It'll also kill buildings that are being nasty, and it replaces itself. Don't expect to play 2 cards at once. Play this in Tournament if you don't have a better pick. In Constructed, it just gets outclassed by almost everything else. Eternal Darkness, terrible. Don't play this card ever. There's no strategies that exist that make this card good. If you have the shards and you're thinking about making a legendary, don't make this one. It's not good. You're going to be disappointed 100% of the time you draw this. And you're going to be disappointed 100% of the times you play this. Don't play it ever. Sorcerer, kind of have a love-hate relationship with this guy. He used to be like my favorite ranged unit in the whole game. Now he's obviously not. His stat line got neutered. His range got neutered. He used to be 3 movement and 3 range. Used to be fantastic. Now he's just underwhelming. Other 6-drop things like Swordsman are going to be better, or you could even throw in another 5-drop like Flame Knight. I think would be better than Sorcerer. However, in Tournament, having the ranged utility could be fairly useful. So he's not horrible, but he's just outclassed. Early game Warlocks are going to like Sorcerer. As you get later, high in the levels, Sorcerer is going to become less and less useful. Touch of the Elder God. This card went straight from rare to legendary with no explanation and no warning, with no change in effect, but just a change in name. This used to be called Insanity. This card's not great. Making the unit not be able to move is a real handicap that, Keeper of the Door doesn't have. However, you can, Touch of the Elder God something, attack something with their own unit, and then sacrifice it and really gain a lot of tempo that way. But situations where that actually happens is useful, and it requires a lot of setup on your end. Generally speaking, you're going to have better stuff to play at this point in the game than Touch of the Elder God. He's just kind of lacking in everything. Don't play it. White Knight, this is a new card. Kind of helps to balance out Warlocks and Draft. I think that's why this card was made. It really needed a high drop generic unit compared to the other classes that have them. Warlocks didn't, and a lot of people didn't like to play it. They were kind of stuck with a bunch of sorcerers. White Knight kind of neutrals the playing field a little bit. In Tournament, play this card all the time. If you're playing Warlocks and you see this card, if you don't have a neutral unit to pick instead, pick it. You won't be disappointed, but in Constructed, it's just kind of lacking in what it does. Just doesn't really have the stopping power to be all that useful. The 7 attack is nice, but the 6 health makes him susceptible to a lot of things that some of the other units aren't. I prefer playing Swordsman over this guy. Akamon, this card used to be a house, now it's hardly ever played because Rakanoth is a thing that essentially does better stuff and everything. So, but Akamon's still good. However, since knockback is a little bit more prevalent now, it's a little bit harder to make this guy useful. So it is really nasty. His explosive, however, is different than the other explosives. If you buff Akamon's attack power, it also buffs his explosive. So if you play Akamon Might of the Minotaur, it'll deal 9 damage to everything around. So keep that in mind when playing Akamon. Buffs to him will buff his explosive, since it says explosive 100%, as opposed to explosive 3, like Pyromancer. So that is kind of cute with Akamon. Other than that, Rakanoth is better, but he's not a bad play. You'll find a lot of use out of Akamon. He can be really nasty, really hard to deal with. So Akamon's quite good. Play him if you don't have Rakanoth. If you have Rakanoth, don't play Akamon. Keeper of the Door, fantastic. I play this in all of my Warlock decks. He's got a huge butt, and I can attack something, gain control of it like I would with Insanity. Then I can move the unit next to something I want to attack their stuff with more of their stuff, and then sacrifice it with stuff like Sacrifice. So Keeper of the Door's fantastic. It should be played in all your Warlock decks if you have it. If you really, really, really like Warlocks and you don't have Keeper of the Door, you should try to get one. Dragon's Fire, this card kind of costs too much for what it does. On late game like this card can be surprising, but you're gonna wish you were playing something else than Dragon's Fire. It can be very surprising. People won't see it coming, but it's just kind of lacking. I actually kind of prefer the next card that we're going to touch on. This is Inferno. I like this card in tournament a lot. You'd think that at that 8 drop it's not so great, but if you draft 1 Inferno, people will never see it coming. I've had somebody play 2 Infernos on me, and I was not expecting it at all. 8 damage will kill pretty much everything. Late game especially, or if you curve to this on turn 8, your opponent's going to have some units clumped up because, especially if you haven't played any Pyromancers or you're not playing Vikings, your opponent's units can have the potential to be cluttered up, especially in tournament mode, and Inferno can just be a devastating turn in the game. In Constructed, it's kind of lackluster because it doesn't deal damage to the castle. In Constructed, you're probably going to wish you had Dragon's Fire, but in tournament mode, I think Inferno is just fine the way it is. Let's touch on... there's 2 cards left. Eye of Flame is the hero. For Warlocks, notice that this is a building hero. But essentially deals 9 damage to anything. It can attack right away. Super nasty. Can destroy pretty much anything. Really, the only way to deal with this is with the Ranger. Anything else, and you're going to be in deep trouble. It plays in the middle of the map. However, you can play it where only 4 move units can reach it, and it can attack the base the turn it comes into play. Deals 9 damage right away. Super hard to deal with. Super great. Mono Warlock is actually significantly more useful because really you only need to deal 21 damage to your opponent, and then you can play Eye of Flame to get the last 9 in there. So when you're playing against a Mono Warlock deck, if you're at 9 or less health, you might as well concede because Eye of Flame will just kill you instantly. There's nothing you can do to stop it. Too good. And then Rakanoth, really, really, really good. I almost expect a nerf to this card. In the beta, this was a 4/7, and I thought that was fine. Then somehow, without anybody really realizing, it increased to a 7/8. The stat line's fantastic. Moving a unit in, it deals 5 damage to the castle, deals 5 damage to buildings, it deals 5 damage to the units. It'll deal 5 damage to anything, everything in the range that your enemies control, so it won't kill your guys. But if it doesn't kill your enemy units, it'll make them significantly weaker. It will blow up buildings. After you play Rakanoth, he can move again after the unit that you sacrificed moves. Obviously, the idea is to walk up to the base and punch it for 7, so it'll deal 12 damage to the base right away without you expecting it. If you're playing, if Mono Warlocks are a thing, then you need to watch out for 9 damage from Eye of Flame, 12 damage for Rakanoth. If the game makes it to that point in the game, you're pretty much already lost, unless you're really, really winning. So, Rakanoth should be played all the time in every single Warlock deck if you don't have Rakanoth, as opposed to School of Pyromancy or whatever. Rakanoth is really the guy that you should be shooting for, just because he's such a huge tempo swing. So that's the breakdown of the Warlock cards. I kind of scrolled through my collection before. You saw my foils and you heard my tales of disappointment. Sorry, this one ran really, really long again. I probably should get back into work at this point. I am kind of working a split shift, so it's not really a huge deal. I told everybody that I was going to be gone long. But here's the Warlock cards. So just keep in mind the strategy with Warlock is to kill your opponent as fast as humanly possible. Some of these cards are better at facilitating it than others. A lot of them are useful. A lot of them are complete trash. So kind of pick whatever fits your playstyle. Different decks use Warlocks differently, where some decks, Uncontrolled Burst is going to be good. Some decks, it's not. You know, some decks, Detonate's going to be good. Sometimes Detonate's going to be terrible. Same thing with things like Darkfire. Some Warlock decks need Darkfire. Some Warlock decks would prefer not to have Darkfire. So there's a lot of different flexibility. Warlocks is usually a support faction to one of the other factions, be it Crusaders or Ninjas, or well, Ninjas is kind of a support faction to Warlocks, but Warlocks is usually a support faction to Vikings or Crusaders is most popular right now, or Pirates, that kind of stuff. It just kind of, I hope I didn't shard that. So it's just kind of whatever you prefer, whatever your play style fits. There's cards in here for low level Warlock players. There are cards in here for high level Warlock players. It's really balanced. It's really good at what it does, but it's not overpowered. I think they did a great job balancing Warlocks, except for that one card here at the end. That would be Rakanoth. I think he's too strong. But take Warlocks for a spin. If you don't have most of these cards, you're still going to have some reasonable success with Warlocks. Alright, like, comment, subscribe my video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.